Hey everybody, happy Friday, and welcome to the September episode of Money Talks. Thank you for joining us, and we are extra excited because this is going to be a good one for a change. We are we we no, this time we really mean it. We really mean it. Because we have our special guest, Dee Paddock, is joining us today from School Administrators Alliance. But before we get to that, let me welcome in our colleagues. First, Brian Adesso from Menasha. Hey, Brian. And Andy Weiland from Oregon. Hey, Andy.
Good morning, Mike.
Right. Well, hey guys, again, happy Friday. So, I this week, every year, this is was always an anxious week because you've got the third Friday count going on, right? So how's it going? Did you over or underestimate your enrollment, or do you know yet? How about you,
I,
Brian?
I do not know
You don't know
because my
yet?
person that does the count is off yesterday and today because the count
Oh,
is due on October
killer.
2nd.
How
I'm
did
more
you allow
concerned about open
that?
enrollment, but yeah, we have a very transient population and I can't forecast my enrollment, unfortunately. So, as everyone knows, those are all big numbers when you don't hit them closely.
Yeah, I used to be like pacing the floor this week. How about you, Andy?
Uh, our person is hiding from me, so I have to kind of track her down every once in a while. But all indications are that I underestimated right now, which is a really good feeling.
Oh wow. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah,
But
when we first went to when WASBO started having conferences where we would have the DPI team and specifically someone to talk about enrollment and counting and the rules and like the Thayer rule and all that. Um, it was always great for those sort of those really outlandish what if questions like, can we count this kid if? And one year at lunch, we just tried to dream up the most ridiculous question to ask the DPI consultant. And I don't remember her name, but she was a really good sport about it. And all I remember was the question started out with, and of course, totally made up. The question started out with, we have a kid whose parents are both astronauts, and they're currently on the International Space Station. So they're not technically on Earth right now. And so the kid has to live with, and the whole thing just got increasingly nuts. And uh, I think the DPI person figured out that we were putting her on after a while. So anyway, yeah, this is a tough week. So I just also want to acknowledge we have a lot of our folks who are doing those referendum community presentations a couple nights a week. So if you are in that group, we salute you, and I bet you too are glad that it's Friday. So 137 questions are on the ballot in November, which is sort of a canary in the coal mine, right? It kind of tells you something's not right with this funding system. So hopefully we can get to something new and better, which is one of the reasons that we have Dee on today. So the order of this presentation today is we have Dee until 8:55. And then importantly, we're going to talk about this Personal Property Tax Act 12 business. And then finally, we're going to give an announcement about a tax levy special edition of Money Talks. So that's the general order. So our special guest today is Dee Paddock, the Executive Director for SAA, School Administrators Alliance. You can see Dee's picture there along with the rest of us. So Dee, are we already talking about the 25-27 state budget?
Well, heck yeah, we are. Despite the fact that Dr. Jill Underly decided to request an extension, which generally speaking is not like new to the public education funding system. Prior to Governor Evers running for governor, we traditionally had requested an extension for our general aids input piece. for the state budget. Sometimes getting past October 30th gives you a little bit of a better picture of where your numbers are going to be in the state budget. I'm not going to say that's exactly why they've delayed the state budget submission for a couple of months, but we will give them the credit that that has been a process in the past that we've engaged in. And it's actually really good because I'm excited to just roll out and get ahead of a lot of people on the state budget piece. And I'm so thankful to WASBO. This is really when I came in my first year, I had already worked on the budget pretty substantially from DPI before I joined SAA as the executive director on July 1. So this is the first year I have the opportunity to really get the jump in the nicest way possible, saying that on the DPI's budget. And I just think it's incredibly important that we get out there with our numbers before the budget submission gets put out there and becomes incredibly political, right? Especially in this year, more than any, we are, and I probably say that every year, so you're probably laughing at me right now, but it feels like the political tension has heightened to a degree that we haven't seen before. And as all of you know, like when I say those types of things, I also, say, oh, well, yeah, they increased the budget to record level spending because they spent $1 more. So it doesn't mean a huge amount, but it is a weird year in the election cycle where we have these new maps. So I think it's really important that we get out there ahead of this. And I've been super thankful to WASBO to help engage me with all of the mathing. I generally have a good grasp on the school finance formula and how that impacts our districts and all the different categorical aids. But Ann Chapman, Mike Berry, our legislative committee have really helped me hone in on how we can use data-backed numbers to enhance our budget requests. So what I want to go through today quickly before I jump into WASDA, and I'll also say I really wanted you all to hear this talk before I went to WASDA, so I didn't have superintendents coming back to your districts and being like, hey, Dee said we're doing this. How about that? And you all were like, oh, that's nice, Dee. Where'd you come up with those numbers, right?
Right.
So I use the people that do all the mathing, AKA my personal legislative fiscal bureau, who is Ann Chapman with WASBO, to help us kind of hone in on where we really should be. So I just want to really quickly run through our top 3 priorities. And obviously, we had the WASDA convention yesterday. Governor Evers came to speak, and his remarks were, keep it simple. Don't make it complicated. Don't put a lot of money in small buckets because that's not going to serve you well. So that really gave me that boost I needed to know that we were on the right track in where we were going with the WASBO discussions in the legislative committee on the budget. So starting out, 60.
So we're hearing this 10 minutes before WASDA does. All right.
Well, and some of it may be a little bit late because Dr. Underly and Governor Evers did preview this a bit in their speeches yesterday, which directly aligns with what we are talking about, which I think is good. There will be some people who bump up higher than we do in a couple of the areas, and I think that is just fine. As long as you are not undercutting us, it's a good story, right?
Okay. Well, here we go. We've got 3 big.
Here we go. Ready, everybody? The math is mathing from our end, so we're just going to roll with it, okay?
Yeah.
We're going to start out as our top line item as 60 and 60 in special education. It's derived from where the Blue Ribbon Commission came from in 2018, when speakers who came before that committee called our special education reimbursement paltry and pathetic. Normally I don't love being called pathetic, but in that case I was like, yeah, we kind of are, right? So 60 and 60 in both year, but also this really significant policy change which I know you all will understand the significance of, and I'm trying to explain it to others, is that we make that appropriation some sufficient versus some certain, so that we align with how the special needs voucher program operates. And that if you tell me I'm getting 60% in the next year, I can darn well expect to get 60 cents on my dollar in that next year. This year, they said we were going to get 33.3. We're at 32.4. I'm
Right.
guessing that makes a pretty big difference in how you budget for your districts for the next year. So some sufficient is an incredibly important policy change that maybe some people will overlook as minor or not the biggest of deal, but I think from you all, your perspectives coming from a budgeting standpoint, having that be a some sufficient appropriation gives you certainty moving into the next year when you're setting and deciding also on where you go for referenda in the next year. So I think that is an incredibly important change. It also brings forward the maintenance of effort from the federal government, which I know some legislators are often nervous about. But there is always an out clause on those, right? So if anybody comes to you and says, well, we can't do that because the maintenance of effort is going to tie our hands in future budgets, you just say, no, if Wisconsin develops a significant fiscal issue in their budgeting, there is an exemption allowed for any number of maintenance of effort requirements for the state to pursue.
Well,
I
a
would
lot,
also, oh, sorry.
Can we just, with the
a
some
lot,
certain, some sufficient, I just want to make sure people understand that.
Okay,
Because I don't know if they do, because we don't usually talk about it because everything is some certain for us for the most part.
sure.
And like some certain is like if they say 60% is $1 million, so then that's what they're going to give. But in reality, we spent more, so 60% is now 1.2 million. So we're kind of shorted that, $200,000. So
Right.
some sufficient would be giving us that $1.2 million, which would equate to 60%.
It
So we're
would
giving
always be 60% of your costs.
Yep.
It's hugely important, right? Because you are budgeting a year forward on these dollars. But you don't know who's coming into your classroom every year. So how do you appropriately budget for that? Also, I'm sorry, the private school special needs scholarship program is operated on a some sufficient methodology in terms of how they fund those students. So, well, my old boss used to say, fair is where you take your cows to show. For those of you from rural Wisconsin, you get that. For those of you from not, maybe. But the overall message from him was fair doesn't always exist in politics, but in this methodology, I think it should. And I think some sufficient is the best way to move forward. And an incredible policy change for our school districts for years to come. Thank you, Brian.
yeah, you don't have to be a historian to know that public education hasn't always done well by kids with special needs. We have in the last, 3 decades, but I think that some specific or some certain, I guess I should say, the current methodology just sort of reflects kind of a disrespect almost for the importance of the issue. It's like, well, we'll give you what you would give you, and if it's not enough, well, then you're just gonna have to prorate it. Which just sounds like very, it doesn't reflect the seriousness of meeting the needs of kids with special needs, and there's a long history of that here in Wisconsin and elsewhere. So, okay, in the interest of time, so special ed is 60% is our lead foot on this, and then.
And then I think we move into general flexible spendable revenues. Again, I just heard Governor Evers speak to our WASBO convention this past week, and he said, keep it simple, stupid. I call it KISS, right? He didn't actually say the stupid part. I just added that for my own benefit. But I really think keeping to just a few large buckets of numbers is better for us than ticking through things like we have in the past where they said, oh, we doubled we doubled mental health funding. Well, yeah, you doubled it from 3 million to 6 million, but I've got 807,000 public school kids in the state of Wisconsin. And how much does that doubling actually buy us in terms of services for our kids? Not much. So we need to stay away from those small buckets that we've been trapped into in the past. And not that they are not important, and not that I will not tee up for those when they come before the Joint Finance Committee, but let's keep our messaging simple. I think going into the general flexible spendable revenue for the next piece is really important. Worked with WASBO and obviously Ann Chapman and others to come up with what we found was the inflationary increase over the 325. And I want to just really hardly reiterate that this methodology for determining the inflation rate was derived from how WERC, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, and the Blue Ribbon Commission have determined their inflationary increases in the past. So if anybody writes a memo on the numbers that we have requested, we will align with that. And we might even be just a tiny bit lower depending on rounding errors, right? So looking at above the 325, moving to 415. So $90 increase in the first year, moving to 430 in the second year. Those align directly with the increases that other organizations, nonpartisan organizations would put forward to the legislature as what would align with inflationary increases over the 325. And I'll be quite honest with you, I've had legislators tell me, Dee, you already got your 325, what more do you want? And I was like, do you have a checkbook you can open right now? I will tell you.
Yeah.
They haven't they haven't done that quite yet, but I do think it is helpful to align on one common number versus where we've been in the past, where we've kind of been all over the map and people are like, well, I'm just going to take the lowest person I can find and negotiate with them versus going to everybody else. So I think sticking with the 415 and the 430 as a revenue limit increase tied to the rate of inflation is incredibly helpful. And then coupling that with a buy down so that the taxpayers don't feel that full impact of that increase, right? We know that that general aid coming back down to keep the property taxes in general, where the legislature tries to keep them, which is less than 1% increase on average year to year, is where we sort of stand. And I think that this gets us there. I apologize. I see some questions coming in the aid pool or in the chat. I'm on my phone and computer, so I can't
No, don't worry.
navigate those. Perfect.
We'll,
We'll hit those at the end. Perfect.
yeah, we've only got you for another like 8 or 9 minutes at the
I'm
most.
I'm
So,
going as fast as I can, Mike. Let me tell you. And then I'm
you're
gonna go
doing
sell this all to your superintendent, so you all hear the same
right.
message coming back from them, which is incredibly important.
No,
Also, thank
you're
you.
doing great.
Looking at a balance between where we fall on the general aid formula and that per pupil categorical aid, which I will take some ownership over, having worked on finance the year that was constructed, I think is incredibly important because we know that the legislature is going to have some big feelings around the revenue limit issue this year, right? The majority party feels like they, for lack of better words, got hosed big time by Governor Evers with his 400-year veto. I personally found it hilarious, but not everybody felt that way, so that's okay. They can sit in their feelings, but that might prevent them from moving towards an increase in the revenue limit. So in that respect, also asking for 100 and 100 on the per pupil categorical aid is a little bit of a backstop there. It also tries to balance what we do between those who do well in the formula and those who maybe don't do so well in the formula, or in worst case scenario, have fallen out of the formula, which is an increasing number of school districts that we're seeing every year. And then the last piece of that general flexible spendable revenue is talking about the low revenue ceiling districts. And shoot, I will fully admit, I thought Ann and I were in a really good place. We had all of our math mapped out. And then we thought about it a little bit more and we're like, gosh, no, everybody didn't get to 11,975 this past year. We had districts that weren't able to move to that amount. We had districts that faced revenue limit penalties based on their failed referenda. So we just need to construct that a little bit differently to make sure we can bring everybody up as far as we can, close that gap, and work towards what the group Equity and Funding for the state of Wisconsin has proposed, getting 90% of school districts within 10% of each other. But Ann and I are going to continue to work through the data we're hoping to receive from DPI in the next couple of days and really dial that into where can we get to on that low revenue limit ceiling that it will make a significant difference. And close that gap more so we're not moving everybody up in the same increments, right? Because if you just give everybody 325 more, that really doesn't close that gap a ton. And also perhaps doesn't recognize the ability of those districts to raise the funds from their taxpayers. And then normally we do 3 pieces, but I'm going to kind of chop it up into three and four. A huge item we're looking at is our workforce stabilization. How do we get to that? We have an enormous number of people coming around the table. We at higher ed, private colleges, UWs, principals, rural schools, Southeast Wisconsin schools, maybe too many people around that table, but that's not my decision. But we are working towards where can we all coalesce together around items that will help support our workforce, not just now for the days ahead, but also in the future, building that pipeline. Can we do a last tuition dollar tax credit for those, or grant credit for those students? Can we try to address shortage areas across the state, highlighting special ed, also our pupil service professionals? Lots of ideas on the table, and really just using this time in the next couple of months to see how we can best utilize the limited funds we will have available to not only conquer the problem for tomorrow, but conquer the problem for our future years as well, because we need to build that pipeline to have our students. And then I would say, Dr. Underly mentioned this. I maybe wouldn't probably have gone on as hard on this, not because I don't care about it, but mental health for students in schools. I think it is incredibly important, but I worry consistently that they will give us, and you will never hear me say this, but they give us too much money that we're not able to spend because we don't have the providers in some of our districts. And then they look at us and they say, well, you said you needed this and you didn't even spend 50% of it. So what the heck is your problem, right? It's not that it's just our problem. And I think that is the piece I want to leave you all with today on that piece, is that far too often we are getting in a situation where our counties and our school districts are kind of putting the blame on each other, saying, well, that's your problem, you deal with it, or that's your problem, you deal with it, instead of having a cohesive method. And often, no offense to the counties, I love them, but they push it back on us because we see those kids every day. And what I say to them consistently, and our mental health professionals from across the state, is that mental health crises don't just occur between 8 and 3:30 p.m. on weekdays. Oftentimes our students see those on weekends, over holiday breaks, those types of things. And we need to better work or have a better working system with the counties where it doesn't all fall back on us, that they assume some of that, because we know that mental health issues are not unique to the student themselves, but often a bigger issue within their family structure. I think probably a lot of us have been there in that situation, and you know how it goes and you can relate to that. And I just think it's been sort of a blame game from the state to the counties to us, like, well, you take care of it. And I just think we need to have a more like groupthink mentality on that, so we can better support not only our students, but also our families who are wrestling with mental health challenges. And also knowing that there are a lack of licensed providers who can work in our school districts to support those schools. And sometimes the counties have more ability to attract those folks. So that would be kind of my fourth item, but also not just on our backs, but working collaboratively with other organizations and municipal governments.
Well, Dee,
Sorry.
so we know that you are speaking to WASDA at 9 o'clock over at the Big Fall Conference, which is just 5 minutes away from now. So Just some advice. When you're presenting on financial matters at WASDA, you're going to want to slow it way down, use really simple terminology. Do like the really light version of what you just gave to WASBO, or else you're going to lose your audience. So take it easy on them.
Do you think my like coughing in between might make it kind of challenging too?
I suggest hand puppets might be helpful as a communication device. But hey, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I hope that we can have you back on the webinar a few more times as we go through the state budget process.
I appreciate it. I am just so happy I was able to be here today because I did not want any of you to have your superintendents coming back and being like, well, Dee said we were going to do this and this and this. And you all were like, what the heck is this lady talking about? Right. However, it has been a great privilege and honor to work with WASBO in developing these numbers. So I appreciate all your help making the math for me. And we will be back in touch very soon. Actually, next week, I will be up at the Osthoff proudly running the 0.0, because that is the extent of my physical ability. So I will probably win that one. But I'm excited to talk to you all then. And if you have any offline conversations you want to bring to me at that point, just please let me know.
All right. Thanks again, Dee, and good luck with your presentation.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need me.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So we're going to carry on. I guess this would be a good time to break here for a second to do a commercial announcement. So, if you're on Money Talks using the premium subscription, you get to listen ad-free. But the rest of you have to suffer through the following ad here on the webinar. Two things. First, the Dee just mentioned that the fall conference at the Osthoff is pretty much sold out, I think. Well, there's a few spots left. There's like 300 plus people. And I'm using real counting, not like presidential election crowd counting. We have actual registrants. So, but there's still some more room, and there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you can use for the fall tax levy season. So encourage you to do that. And then also, we have a couple of courses on WASBO U in November, December, and then a full slate of courses, of course, in the winter. So if you're interested in pursuing that, please go to the WASBO website and head for WASBO U, and you can find out pretty much anything that you need to know. Do we have any other sponsors, Andy, Brian? Do we have no? Any other? No? Okay. Okay. All right. So back to work then. A couple things I wanted to mention about Dee's work. First, I think it's great that WASBO and SAA will have these funding priorities out. They still say draft, as you can see, but the draft stamp will get taken off in a few weeks. Her presentation here and her presentation at WASDA and other venues is designed to offer one last opportunity for some feedback before these become official. So look for these proposals to become official in a few weeks, and well ahead of DPI. I think we actually have a little calendar here. So we'll be publishing our stuff in a few weeks. DPI's presentation or budget priority presentation will happen in, I guess, mid-November. And ideally, our proposal is influencing DPI's proposal. And then the next sort of big milestone here is the January State Ed Convention, which is just kind of this big idea swap. And then ultimately, the governor will have a budget proposal in February. And then it gets handed over to the legislature. And February to May or June, typically, sometimes later than that, is when they'll kick this around. It was such a mixed bag for 23, 25. The low revenue ceiling increase was super helpful to a lot of districts. But it didn't, we didn't have enough equalization aid to really offset that. But still, it was good. And at the same time, there was just this enormous flood of resources going into the voucher programs to help prop those up, which was, frustrating. So again, it was a real mixed bag of things. Hopefully we'll do better this time for 25, 27. What are you guys hearing in your districts? Andy, Brian?
Budget's going to be adopted. Probably July, August.
Are we going to have like a betting pool on this at WASBO, like buy a square and pick the date that the budget will become official?
I'll give you a better estimate around November 10th.
Oh, right. Okay. Great. These one thing you can predict about the state budget is that it's going to be unpredictable. Okay, let's pivot.
Before we pivot, can we go to some of the questions? Because I think some of them, us three can answer them. I was just looking at, is there any chance with the state looking at special ed aid earlier? I would say absolutely not, because there's an election going on. And a lot of people are running for election. They're not going to come back to deal with that. They have more important things in their mind to do. I've heard this one numerous times, especially last budget cycle, is allocating more resources towards special ed will lead to over-identification. And I heard that from a couple of regions last time. I don't understand that. So Menasha is about 20% special ed. When you're that high, the feds are watching you very closely. You get a lot of letters from the feds. Also, the math just doesn't work out. I mean, you're getting 60 cents on the dollar. Why would you want to over-identify and pay for that extra 40%? I mean, just because there's special ed, you're adding on extra services. There's also the staffing thing. There's no special ed staff out there. So,
yeah, the economics of that make no sense. The over-identification for revenue purposes. If you have to spend $1 to get 60 cents, or spend $1 currently to get 32 cents, it doesn't work.
Andy? We will be doing a session just on special ed with a special ed director so that we all understand what the process is to get identified for special ed and all that.
The other argument that comes up is this MOU argument, which I think is sort of a red herring. Wisconsin has one of the lower reimbursement rates in the country. All these other states are able to fund their special ed at significantly higher amounts, and they don't have any problem with MOU. I don't see why we would. I just think it's a deflector. It's a way to get out of the issue, but it's not real. As Dee pointed out, there's plenty of ways to work around that, the state level. So, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. I also want to reinforce Dee's final points, which were, let's, by sticking with the really big ticket items that benefit every district, like special ed reimbursement, revenue limit, and in a way, even the revenue ceiling doesn't impact every district, but it impacts an awful lot of them. I think we're better off. Keep it simple and make it so that you can explain this in just a few minutes. I think in the past, in order to please every constituency in the state, we've had these long menus of potential legislative proposals, for name your issue. And I think it watered down the message, and it made us look like we weren't really very focused. It was just this compendium of every issue you could think of. So I like this strategy better.
There was a question too about the surplus, and they keep coming out that the surplus is going to be growing and growing. And from what we're hearing, the GOP is already talking about how they can't spend it because there's going to be a recession, and we can all predict a recession in the future because if we say it every year, it's going to happen, because they do happen. Like on a 10-year cycle, maybe a little less. So I guess it'll come true at some point, but right now, none of the economic data is showing that we're going to be in a recession. But that's kind of their talking points on the surplus that we have.
Yeah, we're supposed to be in a recession right now, right?
Right.
And the Fed actually has a nice tool available because they raised the rates. In the past, they haven't had that tool the last number of years. So it seems like we're in a good spot.
On the list of canned responses that legislators use to explain why they're not funding something, the recession issue is like the most tried and true excuse. We are either deeply in a recession, so we can't fund what you want, or we're about to be in a deep recession, so we can't fund what you want. It's one or the other. And it's really a way of avoiding having to dig in on issues and prioritize things like, K-12. So you take that with a grain of salt when your legislator tells you that we're heading for a recession. I think the response is, so have you sold everything in your investment portfolio? Right? Oh, no, no. I'm an optimist when it comes to that, right? Okay. What do you think? Should we turn our attention to personal property taxes?
Good news.
All right, let's give it a try. Okay. So this came out yesterday on a DPI school finance bulletin. This has been kind of talked about a little bit over the last 2, 3 weeks at some of the regionals. And if you check your email, if you're on the DPI mailing list, you'll have this. And this explains what's going on with this thing called Wisconsin Act 12, which none of us really talked about at the time. So it has some interesting and positive impacts for your budget development for 24, 25, and beyond, actually, right? So maybe the best way to explain this is with an example. So I'm going to bring up Menashe's material here. Thank you for sending this in, Brian. So everybody in the state every school district got something that looks like this back. It was dated the 15th of August. In your case, it was stamped the 21st. The green highlight bar is something I put in. It's not on the original sheet. So we've all seen the personal property aid on the revenue limit worksheet. It gets pre-populated, right? Line 12, C or D. And this is the sheet that tells you what that amount is going to be. And that's routine. This has happened every year. No big deal, right? So far, so good.
Some people are lost. It's important to note up by under that August 15th date that these letters go to the district administrator. So if you haven't seen this sheet, you need to go into your district administrator or superintendent's office and say, could you give me these sheets? There's 2 of them. They both arrived on the exact same day.
Right. Sometimes sending stuff to the district administrator is like the functional equivalent of sending it to the shredder. Sometimes that doesn't get passed over to you, and it should. So if you don't have this letter, go find it. All right. So this was letter number 1, and this is business as usual, right? And this confused a lot of us. Here comes same day, August 15th, arrived the same day. Again, the purple highlight I put in there. And this one says notice of 22-23 Wisconsin Act 12. It's spelled out right there in the title. This is a very different amount, right, Brian? So in this case, it's the question was, well, what is the deal on this? Do we just add this to the other letter, and then that all becomes part of the revenue limit calculation? It becomes basically it rolls up into the general aid line on line 12. And the more personal property aid you get, then it just increases your aid and decreases your tax levy within the revenue limit. So I think we were all kind of sort of assuming that, but no. And this is the big deal. This second letter, the one that says Act 12 on it, this is not part of the revenue limit. Yay. What will be pre-populated on your sheet is this first one, the green one. The second one will not be on your revenue limit, nor should it be. All it is a special outside the revenue limit. Think of it as almost like a categorical aid, if you will. And you will receive that in a form of a check from the Department of Revenue in May. And so it is a revenue for the 24-25 school year. And in some cases, that's either like, oh, good, that covers me because my enrollment count's a little lower than I thought, or some other expense popped up. In some cases, it's an even bigger deal than that. It really depends on the types of taxable base you have in your community. So if you're like entirely a bedroom community of homes, this is not going to be as huge a deal. But if you're like if you've got a lot of manufacturing and warehousing and that types of stuff, this is going to be a bigger deal. So this is a $57 million bucket that's being allocated to the various 421 school districts. And Brian, so you have what 163,000 there, a little plus change. And are you going to tell your superintendent about it, or are you're hiding this one in the file drawer? What are you going to do?
Go right to the budget. I'm going to budget it under source 691 along with the other one and the computer aid, and it'll go to balance the budget.
Right.
But make sure that if you're not doing that, like treat this like one-time money. Don't go hire staff with it. Treat it like one-time money, and if you're positively aided, you may need to use like Fund 46 or something if you want to get aid on it, or buy literacy curriculum, depending on where you're at with that.
And maybe we should talk about the backstory a little bit. Like the rumor is that maybe this was an error. We don't know that for a fact. We don't know the intention of the legislature, but there seems to be a thought process. Maybe this was supposed to be included with the other line item in the revenue limit. So I think the concern that we have as a group is that it may go away in the future, but I think it's also fair to assume that we probably are safe for the next 2 years with Governor Evers in the office. So I think Brian's thought process is right on, that you might want to think about how you spend this just in case it goes away at some point.
And the whole purpose of this is that this legislator was always wanted to get rid of the personal property tax for businesses. So this was a way that they did it, that the businesses aren't paying this anymore. It's a direct payment from the state. Now it's just how they did it for schools was a little messy.
And
go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say that's the point too, is municipalities get this too, but they don't have a revenue limit, right? So they were going to lose money. So the legislature had to replace it somehow. So they used purpose revenue to do that. And we're a part of that process. And that's probably, if there was an error, where it happened.
Right. So Andy's right. There's been, maybe it just shows you sort of how, K-12 funding's been kicked around a lot, and not been treated super well at the state level, such that when this came through as being outside the revenue limit, which, by the way, that is a settled issue. DPI is on record. They already put it out in their advisory. That's a settled issue. It's outside the limit. But it was like, gee, I wonder if the legislature would have intentionally done something that was actually a benefit to K-12. That's where people were kind of scratching their heads. So who knows what the original intent was here, but the outcome is decided. It's outside the revenue limit. And just, maybe one more minute on this, because the title is so misleading, I think. It's like personal property. What does that even, what is that? So when they first put it in, which was a long time ago, it was explained to us that your commercial property in the district it was being taxed on equipment, if you will, which was called personal property. But it's essentially, think of it as business equipment, and they hated that. So so there was a change made where the things like the school property tax levy was no longer going to extend to like equipment for businesses. And since the state was basically shrinking our tax base and therefore increasing taxes on everybody else, they wanted to prevent that. So what they did was created this aid called, personal property tax exemption aid. So that was the root of it. And it stayed that way for what, 20 plus years? And then this Act 12 came along, which is essentially an extension or a broadening or a deepening of those exemptions, and thus another revenue stream. But the big win here is that it's outside the revenue limit. So
I just want to reiterate that the first sheet that Mike showed, you get that one, and that should be under 691, and that's revenue limit authority. So you'll budget that. The equalization aid kind of balances it out so that on your revenue limit sheet. And the second one, you also budget in 691, and that doesn't go on the revenue limit. That's just revenue. So you add them both together plus your computer aid, and that should be your 691.
I think DPI might have a little bit more guidance just to confirm and explain in more detail what Brian just went through. So we've asked them to do that. So stay tuned for that. So this is just something to keep in mind as you're wrapping up your enrollment counts and turning your attention towards budget updates, revenue limit calculations, and tax levies. So it's a positive.
My assumption too is that it would probably come in two separate payments on May 5th, because it's probably coming from two different sources at the state. So they're probably it's gonna probably show up as two payments.
Right. Okay, so mark your calendar for May 5th and march down to the superintendent's office and make sure they didn't throw out anything that came from the Department of Revenue. Because there should be a transmittal letter, even if this is wired. Okay, so how are we doing on this? Have we covered it enough? Okay, so that should be something to brighten your day on a Friday morning. Last thing I think we wanted to cover today is, hey, a special edition of Money Talks, as if you haven't suffered enough. Yes, we're coming back on October 11th on a Friday morning, as always, at 8:30 to cover some tax levy issues. We want to go over again, as we did last year at this time, school levy tax credits and how to handle that, both in terms of the amounts and then sort of how to communicate with your board on that. Voucher payment impacts and how to assess it and how to talk about it. Tax levy versus equalized tax rate. Again, this is a communications challenge. And then lastly, just general good board communications during that window between the October 15th and the November 1st deadline to set your levy. Maybe we can have a few examples of some PowerPoint decks that we thought were particularly effective. So if you're looking for some help or just some chance to get your mind around what that whole process looks like, join us again on October 11th at 8:30 a.m. with the same exciting cast as you have here today, except for D. So before we wrap up, any final comments from Andy or from Brian?
Well, just looking forward to seeing everybody next week if you're be able to attend the fall conference.
Yeah. Brian?
Nice to get out of the office for a couple of days and hopefully not worry about the budget.
That's right. So, hey, we look forward to seeing you at the Osthoff if you can make it. Otherwise, hey, in the meantime, enjoy the beautiful weather we're supposed to get this weekend, and we'll see you down the road.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.